guys, how's it going? So I wanted to record a video for the violin players that maybe are interested in playing mandolin and you just haven't had somebody explain kind of why the instrument is similar and the things you could be doing differently to approach the mandolin as a violin player. So this video is just to give you some ideas, basically to show you what the mandolin is like and to give you tips on how you can play it, approaching it from that understanding of already playing violin, because they are similar instruments, right? Which brings me to my first point. So you may know this or maybe you're unfamiliar, but the mandolin is tuned the exact same as the violin. So it has double strings, but your low string is G and then D, A, and E. So it's tuned in fifths. So what that means is that if you have a melody, let's say starting in first position, if you play something here on violin, you can basically play the same fingering here on mandolin. I'm going to get into some of the differences of why I prioritize using my third finger, for instance, as opposed to my fourth finger, or basically prioritizing my first three fingers, which are stronger and more accurate, and they're gonna give me a better tone. Because I think ultimately the mandolin, the double strings are a little harder to press down than just the single string of the violin. So if you read music, you could find any kind of sheet music for fiddle tunes or any type of tune. And if you can read that on violin, then you can read that on mandolin. If I just play in the key of D, that might look like this. But the big difference here, if you're trying to learn some mandolin, would be your right hand, the right hand technique. So we need to talk about picking and strumming. Basically, I use a triangle pick like this. This pick is a Wiegand that I'm using today. I think it's the the model number is like 144 or something like that. It's a triangle pick with a bevel. You can experiment with picks and see what you like, but I think you'll find that most mandolin players are hip to this, that you need a little bit thicker pick and typically having a bevel, meaning that you have that side that has like an angle on the side. That's going to be helpful for getting a good tone. A lot of times I use a blue chip pick, but for some reason I found this one the other day and I felt it had like a nicer touch on this mandolin for some reason. But basically, for picking, I'm going to put my thumb across the pick like this, and then I curl my first finger and put it down like that. So a little bit of the pick is exposed. You guys can actually find this information in my right hand technique video. I have an instructional video on my website, but I also have an excerpt here on YouTube that talks a little bit more about the right hand. So with that in mind, I'm just holding the pick with my first finger, my index finger, and my thumb like that. And then what you do with these fingers, you can kind of experiment and see what you like best, but oftentimes I keep them in. I keep them tighter in like this because that helps me with my efficiency of my economy of motion, and kind of my center of mass of my hand is just more efficient. I want to show you some exercises that you can do to kind of get familiar with strumming. If you're familiar with guitar at all, that you can really bring some of those concepts and techniques over, because it's the same general idea of what's happening with like a fretted instrument that's strummed. But basically, a lot of times you can use your third finger. For instance, I'm going to play on the 7th fret on the G string and get a D, but then that doubles up when I can play the next open D, and then I can play with an A as well. So that's a nice open D chord. And actually, this just gets us familiar with kind of strumming. So a strum pattern might be like down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. And you can kind of, mess around with some variations on that rhythm. I can get the open E string in there too. But you can move this note just to kind of explore some of the options for our open strings. I can move this note like this. So walk down movements like that, or so I'm utilizing those open strings. That's a big difference with the violin, that I have those strings that I can just hit once and they continue to ring out. Other examples of open chords, a G is a great starting point. I'm basically playing a 3rd fret on the E string with my 2nd finger, get that G, and then a B. With my 1st finger on this A string on the 2nd fret. That's a G major 7. Now, another option for doing like an open chord for A might be I put my 1st finger on the 2nd fret here and here, 1st fret, 2nd fret with my 1st finger on the G and the D strings. And then I can do some things like that, basically using arpeggio notes, like I'm using C sharp. I can do it up here too with my 9th fret and 7th fret. So that's some ideas for open chords. Now, a really go-to like standard bar chord, as they call it, like where you're barring several notes. On that same chord, like A, if I play those 2 notes again, A and E, and then I play a C sharp and then an A, that's a really standard shape for a bar chord, and I can just move that all over the neck. And as you might be familiar with already, if you really do play a violin, then the 3rd is what's making that major or minor. So that's a major chord because it has C sharp. But if I make it minor, there's A minor. So that's another really valuable chord shape you can learn. Another really valuable chord shape that I would recommend is kind of a bluegrass shape. And that's where, let's say if I do that for a C chord, I'd put my 3rd finger on the 5th fret on C, and then 1st finger on the 2nd fret on E, and then a C there with my 2nd finger. So this type of chord is really great for doing that bluegrass chop where you chop on 2 and 4. Now, that chord can be moved all over the place, but if you move it, for instance, like over a string, so like to a G right here, then you're going to fill in that low string with that note right there with your 4th finger. So that's a great chord as well. That's really bluegrassy. That's the bluegrass mandolin sound. Another really important chord shape that I think you should learn for being able to play like lots of different styles of music, like jazz or pop music or something, is the dominant shape. There's a couple dominant shapes, and you can find this in other videos as well that I do. But basically, like if I wanted to play like a D7, I'd play a C note here with my 2nd finger on the 5th fret of the G string, and then on I got an F sharp note and then a D on the A string. And so that is a great D7. Now check this out. If I leave my 3rd finger there on the 5th fret of the A string on that D note, but then I bring my other 2 fingers back, that's a G7. So that's really handy as well. That's like the other dominant shape, right? So that's a little bit of an overview on like what you can do with some chords. So a big concept that I think you need to get familiar with as far as like strumming and picking, just kind of the nature of the mandolin is that now that you don't have a bow that has to constantly play it on the string to produce sound, you just pluck, basically you pick a note and it continues to ring. So as I'm playing, that totally affects like what I'm able to do, because I can build chords note by note where I just start sustaining those notes and then I keep picking other ones, right? So I'm kind of doing a hybrid where I like play some lines kind of in between these chords. So if you're trying to play like fiddle tunes and bluegrass music, especially on mandolin, I think you need to know the alternating pick stroke method. So that basically says that we are putting our downstrokes on the front of the beat. So if it's 2/8 notes to a beat, then the first eighth note is going to be a downstroke typically. That's really what this method is. It's always going to be a downstroke. And then your upstrokes will be on the other half of the beat, on the second eighth note in a pair of eighth notes. And what that means is that, so if you're playing like 1, 2, 3, so I started that phrase on an upstroke because it's on the and. And then the rest of the time, I am just playing alternating pick strokes, regardless of which string that I'm going to. It's just always alternating. Now, let's talk about the left hand a little bit. We talked about earlier that it really is the same fingering, right? That would make sense. Like if you're in first position, you're assigning your first finger to the first 2 frets, second finger to the next 2 frets, 3 and 4, and then your third finger would be like 5th fret and 6th fret. But I think the big difference here is that what I learned, like what works on mandolin, is that I don't use my 4th finger as much as violin players do. You definitely should use your 4th finger when it's appropriate. But my rule here is that, if you're in first position like this in G, you want to use your 4th finger if you're just grabbing like a B flat or a B. But that's really only if I'm just grabbing that note. That's going to be the highest note. And then if I continue to play the phrase where it basically gets away from that and it's going down, then I will just stay in that position. That's why I'm going to use my 4th finger. But if I want to play something where I really am going to hang out on that type of like note, that position, like a B on that E string, then I'm going to go ahead and switch to where I have got my first finger on G. It just works so much better. Your fingers are stronger, you get a better tone and better control and more precise and all of those things because I'm prioritizing those first 3 fingers. Oftentimes I just use my 3rd finger again to grab, even though it's that highest note. I'm not using my 4th finger. I'm just really prioritizing my 1st, 2nd, and 3rd fingers. And then oftentimes what that also means is like, similar to how you're playing like chords up the neck of the mandolin. It's really common on mandolin to just play like in 3rd position or 4th position up here. That's how I play. But even just any mandolin player is going to really be using playing up in this part of the neck. As opposed to, I would think on violin, you're going to be prioritizing the first position. Whereas on mandolin, it's kind of more like leaning towards that, like the guitar, right? The kind of the nature of the guitar and like the guitar neck and so the mandolin is kind of similar to that because I can play chords and do these things up. And oftentimes, so I'll just start here, even though I could play. Maybe it just makes sense to start there. And it has a different tone, too. It has like a throatier, kind of deeper, kind of stronger tone as well. All right. See you guys next time.